David pulled his rental car into the driveway of his new home, feeling a mix of exhaustion and excitement. The week-long business conference in Chicago had been draining, but coming back to his very own house made it all worth it. After years of saving and apartment hunting, he finally had the keys to his dream home in Maple Street. The house was a beautiful two-story colonial with white shutters and a red front door. David had fallen in love with it the moment his real estate agent showed it to him 3 months ago. The elderly previous owner, Mr. Thompson, had taken great care of the property. The lawn was perfectly manicured, and the flower beds were still blooming with colorful roses and daisies. As David stepped out of his car, he stretched his arms and took a deep breath. The quiet suburban neighborhood was exactly what he had been looking for after living in a noisy downtown apartment for so many years. Birds were chirping in the old oak trees that lined the street, and he could hear the distant sound of children playing in someone's backyard. He walked to the trunk of his car and pulled out his heavy suitcase and laptop bag. The business trip had been successful, but he was ready to relax in his own space. David had been working as a software developer for 8 years, and this house represented all his hard work paying off. His parents would be so proud when they came to visit next month. As he approached his front door, David noticed that his keys seemed to have gotten tangled with his phone charger at the bottom of his laptop bag. He set down his suitcase and started digging through the bag, trying to untangle the mess. The keys were stuck pretty good, and he had to pull at them carefully to avoid breaking the charger cord. "Come on," David muttered to himself, finally freeing the keys after a minute of careful untangling. He picked up his suitcase again and walked up the 3 steps to his front porch. That's when he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me." "Hey, excuse me." David turned around to see a woman in her 50s standing on the porch of the house next door. She had short blonde hair and was wearing a bright blue jogging outfit. Her face looked worried, and she was holding what appeared to be a gardening tool in her hand. "Hi there," David said with a friendly smile, assuming she was just being neighborly. "I'm David. I just moved in a few weeks ago." The woman, who would later introduce herself as Linda, didn't return his smile. Instead, she stepped closer to the property line between their houses, her expression growing more serious. "I don't think so," Linda said, shaking her head. "Mr. Thompson lived there for 30 years and he just moved out. I know everyone in this neighborhood and I've never seen you before." David felt a little confused but tried to stay patient. Moving to a new neighborhood always took some adjustment, and he understood that neighbors might be cautious about strangers. "Oh, you must have missed it," David explained, pulling his keys up to show her. "I bought the house from Mr. Thompson about 3 months ago. I've been traveling for work, so I haven't been around much. I'm actually just getting back from a business trip." Linda's eyes narrowed as she looked at the keys in David's hand. "Those could be anyone's keys," she said, her voice getting louder. "How do I know you're not just breaking in? This is a safe neighborhood and we look out for each other here." David felt his stomach drop a little. This conversation was not going the way he had expected. He had imagined meeting his neighbors over coffee or maybe chatting about the weather while getting his mail. This felt much more intense than a normal neighborly introduction. "I understand your concern," David said, trying to keep his voice calm and friendly, "but I really do live here. Look, I have my driver's license with this address on it. Would that help?" He reached for his wallet, but Linda took a step back and held up her hand. "Anyone can fake documents these days," she said. "I watch the news. I know how these things work. If you really lived there, I would have seen you moving in. I would have seen moving trucks. I pay attention to what happens on this street." David realized that Linda must have missed the moving day, which had happened on a Tuesday morning when most people were at work. He had taken the day off, but the moving truck had come and gone pretty quickly since he didn't have that much furniture yet. "The movers came on a Tuesday morning about 3 weeks ago," David explained. "Maybe you were at work? It was pretty quick because I don't have much stuff yet. I'm still buying furniture and getting settled." Linda shook her head again, and David could see that she was getting more upset, not less. Her face was turning red, and she was gripping the gardening tool tighter in her hand. "I work from home," Linda said loudly. "I would have seen any moving truck. You're lying, and I don't appreciate being lied to." I think you need to leave this property right now, before I call the police. David felt his heart start to beat faster. This situation was getting out of hand quickly and he wasn't sure how to fix it. He had been looking forward to a quiet evening at home, maybe ordering some pizza and watching a movie. Instead, he was standing on his own front porch being accused of breaking into his own house. "Ma'am, I promise you I'm not lying," David said, trying to project as much sincerity as possible in his voice. "This is really my house. I have the mortgage papers inside and utility bills and everything else. I can show you whatever you need to see." "I don't want to see fake papers," Linda replied, her voice now loud enough that David worried other neighbors might start looking out their windows. "I want you to leave before something bad happens. This is a good neighborhood with good people, and we don't need troublemakers coming around here." David felt a chill run down his spine at the word of troublemakers. Something about the way Linda said it and the way she was looking at him made him realize that this might not just be about her not recognizing him as a neighbor. "I'm not a troublemaker," David said quietly. "I'm just a guy who bought a house and wants to go inside and rest after a long week of work. I'm a software developer. I paid good money for this house and I have every right to be here." Linda laughed, but it wasn't a nice laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made David feel small and unwelcome. "Software developer," she said mockingly. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England. Look, I don't know what your game is, but it's not going to work here. People like you need to understand that this isn't the kind of neighborhood where you can just show up and cause problems." The phrase "people like you" hit David like a punch to the stomach. Now he understood what was really happening here. This wasn't about Linda not recognizing him or being concerned about neighborhood safety. This was about something much deeper and more painful. David had experienced this kind of thing before, but never quite like this. Never on his own property, at his own front door, after working so hard to achieve his dream of home ownership. He felt angry and hurt and confused all at the same time. "What do you mean, people like me?" David asked, though he was pretty sure he already knew the answer. Linda seemed to realize that she had said something she shouldn't have, because her face got even redder and she started talking faster. "I mean people who don't belong here," she said. "People who show up claiming to own houses they don't own. People who make honest neighbors feel unsafe in their own homes." David took a deep breath and tried to think clearly. He could feel his hands shaking a little, partly from anger and partly from the shock of this whole situation. He had never imagined that buying his dream house would lead to standing on his own porch being told he didn't belong there. "I'm going to go inside my house now," David said as calmly as he could manage. "This is my property, and I have every right to be here. If you want to call the police, that's your choice, but they're going to tell you the same thing I'm telling you. This is my house." Linda's eyes got very wide and she pointed at David with her gardening tool. "Don't you dare go in that house," she shouted. "I'm calling 911 right now. There's a criminal trying to break into Mr. Thompson's house." David felt like the world was spinning around him. Criminal? He was a homeowner trying to enter his own property after a business trip. But he could see that Linda had already made up her mind about who he was and what he was doing there. As Linda pulled out her phone and started dialing, David realized that this was about to become much bigger than just a misunderstanding between neighbors. This was about to become the kind of story that people would talk about for a long time. David watched in disbelief as Linda held her phone up to her ear, her fingers shaking as she waited for someone to answer. He could hear the faint sound of the emergency operator picking up the call. "1, what's your emergency?" came the voice from Linda's phone. "Yes, hello, I need police right away," Linda said, her voice suddenly taking on a dramatic tone that sounded completely different from how she had been talking to David. "There's a man trying to break into my neighbor's house on Maple Street. I'm really scared." David felt his heart sink. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Linda was making it sound like he was some kind of dangerous criminal when all he wanted to do was go inside his own home and rest after a long week of work. "Ma'am, can you describe what's happening?" the operator asked. Linda glanced at David with a look that made his stomach turn. "There's a suspicious man with luggage trying to get into 1247 Maple Street. He claims he lives there, but I know he doesn't. The elderly man who lived there just moved out, and I've never seen this person before. He's being really aggressive with me when I asked him what he was doing." David's mouth fell open. Aggressive? He had been nothing but polite and patient, even when Linda started accusing him of lying. He pulled out his own phone and started recording, his hands trembling slightly as he held it up. "I'm recording this," David called out, making sure his voice was clear on the video. "My name is David Johnson and this is my house at 1247 Maple Street. I bought this house 3 months ago from Mr. Thompson. I have all the legal documents inside." Linda turned away from him and lowered her voice, but David could still hear her talking to the operator. "He's got his phone out now, recording me," Linda whispered urgently. "I think he might be planning something. I'm really frightened. This is usually such a quiet neighborhood, and now there's this stranger here claiming he owns a house that I know he doesn't own." The 911 operator's voice was calm and professional. "Ma'am, I'm sending officers to your location. Can you safely go inside your house while we wait for them to arrive?" "Yes, I think so," Linda replied. "But please hurry. I don't know what this person might do." David couldn't stay quiet anymore. "I'm not doing anything," he called out loud enough for the operator to hear. "I'm standing on my own front porch with my own keys trying to get into my own house." Linda ended the call and hurried toward her front door, but not before turning back to glare at David. "The police are coming," she announced. "We'll see what they have to say about your story." David stood there for a moment, feeling completely overwhelmed. This was not how he had imagined his homecoming would go. He looked down at his phone, which was still recording, and tried to collect his thoughts. "Okay," he said to the camera. "So I just got home from a business trip, and my neighbor is calling the police because she thinks I'm breaking into my own house. I have my keys, I have my driver's license with this address, and I have mortgage. Papers inside. This is really happening." David decided he should probably call someone while he waited for the police to arrive. He scrolled through his contacts and found the number for his real estate agent, Ms. Rodriguez, who had helped him buy the house. "Hi, this is David Johnson," he said when she answered. "I bought the house on Maple Street from you a few months ago. I have a really strange situation happening right now." Ms. Rodriguez remembered him immediately. "David, how's the new house treating you? What's going on?" David explained the whole situation while he stood on his porch, his suitcase still sitting beside him where he had dropped it when Linda first called out to him. Ms. Rodriguez listened carefully and said she would be happy to speak with the police when they arrived to confirm the sale. "I still have all the paperwork from your purchase," she assured him. "Don't worry, David. This will get sorted out quickly once the officers see your documentation." Next, David called his friend Mike, who lived about 20 minutes away. Mike had helped him move some of his furniture on that Tuesday morning when the moving truck came. Mike was shocked to hear what was happening. "Are you serious right now?" Mike asked. "She called the cops on you for going into your own house? That's crazy, man. Do you want me to come over there?" "I think I'll be okay once the police get here and sort this out," David replied. "But thanks for offering. It's just so weird, you know? I've been looking forward to coming home all week, and now I'm standing outside my own house like I'm not allowed to go in." While David was on the phone with Mike, he noticed that other neighbors were starting to peek out of their windows and front doors. Word was traveling fast that something unusual was happening on Maple Street. He could see curtains moving in, windows up and down the block, and a few people had come out onto their porches to get a better look. David felt embarrassed and frustrated. He hadn't even had a chance to properly introduce himself to most of his neighbors yet, and now the first impression they were getting was of him being accused of breaking and entering. About 15 minutes after Linda made her call, David heard the sound of police sirens in the distance. His stomach tightened as he realized this situation was about to become very real. He had never been in trouble with the law before, and the thought of having to explain himself to police officers made him nervous. 2 patrol cars pulled up to the curb in front of David's house. 4 officers got out, and David was relieved to see that they looked calm and professional rather than aggressive or rushed. The lead officer, a tall man with graying hair, approached David with a neutral expression. "Good evening," the officer said politely. "I'm Officer Martinez. We received a call about a possible break-in at this address. Can you tell me what's going on here?" David felt a wave of relief at the officer's calm tone. "Yes, sir. My name is David Johnson, and this is my house. I just got back from a business trip, and when I was trying to unlock my front door, my neighbor called 911. She thinks I'm breaking in, but I live here. I bought this house 3 months ago. Officer Martinez nodded and pulled out a small notebook. Okay, David. Do you have identification with this address on it? Yes, absolutely, David replied, reaching for his wallet. He pulled out his driver's license and handed it to the officer. I also have mortgage papers and utility bills inside the house if you need to see those. While Officer Martinez examined David's license, another officer went to speak with Linda, who had come back outside when she saw the police cars arrive. David could see her talking animatedly, gesturing toward him and his house. This license shows your address as 1247 Maple Street, Officer Martinez confirmed. That matches this property. How long have you lived here? I bought the house about 3 months ago from the previous owner, Mr. Thompson, David explained. But I've been traveling a lot for work, so I haven't been here much. I think that's why my neighbor doesn't recognize me. The third officer, a younger woman, joined their conversation. Sir, can you tell us about your purchase of this property? Do you have documentation? David nodded eagerly. I have everything inside. The deed, mortgage papers, homeowner's insurance, utility bills in my name. My real estate agent, Ms. Rodriguez, handled the sale. I can call her if you want to verify everything. That would be helpful, Officer Martinez said. In the meantime, would you mind if we take a look at your identification? Documents inside? Of course not, David replied. It's my house. You're welcome to see whatever you need to see. As they walked toward the front door, David couldn't help but feel strange about having to prove he belonged in his own home. He had worked so hard. To save money for the down payment, had spent weeks looking at houses and had been so excited when his offer was accepted. Now he was having to convince police officers that he had the right to walk through his own front door. David unlocked the door easily, which Officer Martinez noted in his notebook. Inside, David's belongings were exactly where he had left them before his business trip. His coffee mug was still on the kitchen counter. His mail was stacked on the dining room table. Family photos were displayed on the bookshelf. This certainly looks like someone lives here, the female officer observed as David gathered his mortgage documents from a folder he kept in his desk drawer. Officer Martinez examined the paperwork carefully, while David called Ms. Rodriguez to confirm the details of the sale. She answered immediately and provided all the verification the officers needed. Everything checks out, Officer Martinez told David after speaking with the real estate agent. You're clearly the legitimate owner of this property. David felt a huge wave of relief wash over him. So what happens now? He asked. The officer's expression became more serious. Well, we need to have a conversation with your neighbor about making false reports to 911. What she told our dispatcher doesn't match what we found here. David looked out his front window and saw Linda standing in her yard talking to the fourth officer. She kept pointing at David's house and shaking her head as if she still couldn't believe what she was being told. I don't want to cause trouble for her, David said, though he felt hurt by everything that had happened. I just want to be able to live in my house peacefully. Officer Martinez nodded understanding. I appreciate that attitude, David, but filing false police reports is a serious matter. We'll handle it appropriately. As the officers prepared to wrap up their investigation, David realized that this evening had changed everything about how he felt in his new neighborhood. What should have been a simple homecoming had turned into something much more complicated and painful. David watched from his front window as Officer Martinez walked across the yard to speak with Linda. She was still standing near her porch, but now she looked much less confident than she had when she was yelling at David earlier. Her face had gone pale and she kept wrapping her arms around herself like she was cold, even though it was a warm evening. The officer's conversation with Linda lasted about 10 minutes. David couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see Linda's body language changing as the discussion went on. At first, she was still gesturing wildly and pointing at David's house, but gradually her shoulders started to slump and she began looking down at the ground more often. When Officer Martinez came back to David's house, his expression was serious. Mr. Johnson, the officer said, I need to let you know that your Neighbor made several statements in her 911 call that don't match the facts of this situation. She told our dispatcher that you were being aggressive and acting suspiciously, but our investigation shows that you're the legitimate homeowner just trying to enter your own property. David nodded, feeling a mix of vindication and sadness. I tried to explain to her that I lived here, but she wouldn't listen to anything I said. Filing a false police report is a criminal offense, Officer Martinez explained. We're going to have to document this incident properly. Ms. Linda Patterson will likely face charges for providing false information to emergency services. David felt strange hearing Linda's last name for the first time. Up until now, she had just been the neighbor who called the cops on me. Learning her full name somehow made the whole situation feel more real and more serious. What kind of charges? David asked, not because he wanted Linda to get in trouble, but because he was curious about what happened when someone made false 911 calls. Depends on the district attorney's office, Officer Martinez replied. Could be a fine, community service, or both. The important thing is that there are consequences for wasting emergency resources and making false accusations. After the police officers left, David finally got to go inside his house and try to relax, but relaxation was the last thing on his mind. He kept replaying the whole incident over and over, wondering what he could have done differently and feeling hurt by Linda's assumptions about him. David decided to order some Chinese food for dinner and try to decompress by watching a movie. But as he was browsing through streaming services on his TV, his phone started buzzing with notifications. His friend Mike had apparently told some other people about what happened, and word was spreading. His phone rang, and it was his sister, calling from California. Mike told me what happened, she said as soon as David answered. Are you okay? I can't believe someone called the police on you for going into your own house. David spent 20 minutes explaining the whole story to his sister, and then another 15 minutes talking to his parents when his sister conference called them in. His family was shocked and angry about what had happened, but David found that talking about it helped him process his feelings. The worst part, David told his friend's gut, is that I was so excited to come home. I've been working so hard, and buying this house was like achieving a dream, you know? And then to have someone tell me I don't belong here in my own home. It just really hurt. His mother's voice was full of sympathy. I'm so sorry this happened. To you, honey. You worked so hard for that house, and you deserve to feel safe and welcome there. After talking to his family, David tried to settle in for the evening, but he kept hearing noises outside and looking out the window to see if Linda was still in her yard. The whole experience had left him feeling anxious and unsettled in a place where he was supposed to feel most comfortable. Around 9 o'clock, David's doorbell rang. He looked through the peephole and saw a woman in her 60s standing on his porch, holding what looked like a casserole dish. He opened the door cautiously. Hi there, the woman said with a warm smile. I'm Betty Williams from 3 houses down. I heard about what happened this evening, and I wanted to come introduce myself and apologize for how you were treated. David felt a wave of relief at Betty's kind tone. Thank you, he said. I'm David. I bought this house a few months ago. I know, dear, Betty replied. I saw the moving truck that Tuesday morning. I was going to come over and introduce myself, but then I got busy with my grandchildren visiting, and time just got away from me. I should have made more effort to welcome you to the neighborhood sooner. Betty handed David the casserole dish. This is my famous tuna noodle casserole. It's comfort food, and I thought you might need some comfort food after the day you've... David was touched by the gesture. That's so kind of you. Would you like to come in for a minute? Betty accepted the invitation, and they sat in David's living room while she told him more about the neighborhood. She had lived on Maple Street for over 20 years and knew everyone who lived there. Linda moved in about 5 years ago after her divorce, Betty explained. She's always been a little intense about neighborhood watch type things, but what happened tonight crossed a line. Several of us neighbors saw what was going on, and were not happy about it. Betty went on to explain that Linda had caused problems before. She had called the police on the teenage boy who delivered newspapers early in the morning, claiming he was casing houses for burglaries. She had complained to the homeowners association about a family who had relatives visit frequently, saying there were too many cars and suspicious activity. Last month, Betty continued, She called the non-emergency police line about the lawn service crew that works on the Hendersons' yard, saying they looked suspicious and might be planning to rob houses while they were working. David was starting to see a pattern in Linda's behavior, and it made him feel both better and worse at the same time. Better because he realized this wasn't really about him personally, and worse because he understood that Linda's problems with him likely had to do with her own biases and fears. "The thing is," Betty said gently, "Linda seems to find people suspicious who don't look like her, and that's not the kind of neighborhood most of us want to live in." The next morning, David woke up to find that the story had taken on a life of its own. His friend Mike had shared David's recording of the incident on social media, and it had been viewed and shared hundreds of times overnight. David's phone was full of messages from friends, co-workers, and even people he didn't know who had seen the video. The video showed Linda clearly stating that people like you don't belong in the neighborhood, and it captured her refusing to look at David's identification or listen to his explanations. It also showed David remaining calm and polite throughout the entire confrontation. By lunchtime, the local news station had picked up the story. A reporter called David and asked if he would be willing to do an interview about what happened. David wasn't sure he wanted that kind of attention, but he also felt like sharing his story might help other people understand how hurtful and wrong it was to make assumptions about people based on their appearance. The news story aired that evening, and it included David's interview as well as comments from other neighbors who supported him. Betty Williams was interviewed and said that David was a wonderful addition to the neighborhood and that Linda's behavior was completely unacceptable, but the story also had consequences that David hadn't expected. The news report mentioned that Linda worked for a company called Community Solutions, which helped businesses with diversity and inclusion training. By the next day, the company's social media pages were flooded with comments from people who had seen the news story. David heard from Betty that Linda had taken several days off work after the incident. Apparently, her employer was conducting an internal investigation about whether someone who would call the police on a neighbor for being in his own home should be representing their company's commitment to diversity and inclusion. The Homeowners Association also got involved. David received a call from the association president, Mr. Chen, who wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss the incident. "We take community harmony very seriously," Mr. Chen explained. "What happened to you goes against everything our neighborhood association stands for. We want to make sure you feel welcome here, and we also need to address Ms. Patterson's behavior." David learned that the Homeowners Association had specific rules about harassment and discrimination. Members were expected to treat all neighbors with respect and courtesy, regardless of their background. Linda's actions had violated several of these community guidelines. Meanwhile, David was surprised by how much support he received from neighbors he had never even met. People stopped by his house to introduce themselves and express their disapproval of Linda's behavior. The family across the street brought him homemade cookies. The couple next door to Linda came over to apologize for not intervening when they saw what was happening. "We should have come outside and told Linda to stop," said Mr. Rodriguez, who lived at 1249 Maple Street. "We could see from our window that you had keys and luggage, and it was obvious you belonged there. We feel terrible that we didn't speak up." David appreciated everyone's support, but he also felt overwhelmed by all the attention. He had just wanted to come home from his business trip and relax in his own house. Instead, he had become the center of a neighborhood controversy and a local news story. The strangest part was how different Linda looked whenever David saw her now. Before the incident, she had seemed confident and confrontational. Now, when he occasionally glimpsed her in her yard or driveway, she looked small and embarrassed. She avoided making eye contact and hurried inside whenever she saw David outside. David found himself feeling sorry for Linda, even though she had caused him so much stress and embarrassment. He could see that the consequences of her actions were affecting her whole life, and he wondered if she was learning anything from the experience or if she was just angry about getting caught. 2 weeks after the incident, David received a phone call from the district attorney's office. The prosecutor handling Linda's case wanted to let him know that formal charges had been filed against her for filing a false police report and making false statements to emergency services. "Ms. Patterson will have to appear in court next month," the prosecutor explained. "These charges carry potential fines up to $5,000 and up to 6 months of community service. We take false emergency calls very seriously because they waste valuable police resources and can prevent officers from responding to real emergencies. David felt mixed emotions hearing this news. Part of him was glad that there were real consequences for Linda's actions, but another part of him felt sad that things had gone this far. He had never wanted to ruin anyone's life, even someone who had treated him so poorly. The legal consequences were just the beginning of Linda's problems. 3 days after the news story aired, David saw a moving truck parked outside Linda's house. Betty Williams came over that evening to fill him in on what had happened. Linda lost her job, Betty explained as they sat on David's front porch drinking iced tea. Community Solutions fired her yesterday. Apparently, they said that someone who would call the police on a neighbor for being in his own home couldn't represent a company that specializes in diversity and inclusion training. David shook his head. I never wanted her to lose her job. I just wanted her to understand that what she did was wrong. I know, dear, Betty replied. But companies have to protect their reputation. When that news story went viral and people started connecting Linda to her workplace, Community Solutions had to make a choice. They chose to distance themselves from her behavior. The Homeowners Association meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday morning at the community center. David wasn't sure he wanted to attend, but Mr. Chen had called and specifically asked him to come so the board could formally apologize and discuss changes to prevent similar incidents in the future. When David walked into the community center, he was surprised to see about 40 neighbors there. Usually, homeowners association meetings only drew 10 or 12 people. But word about the meeting had spread, and it seemed like everyone wanted to be part of the conversation about what had happened. Mr. Chen started the meeting by addressing the incident directly. We're here today because one of our neighbors was made to feel unwelcome in his own home, he said. This goes against everything our community stands for, and we need to take steps to make sure it never happens again. Several neighbors stood up to speak during the public comment period. Mrs. Henderson, who lived 2 blocks away, talked about how embarrassed she was that someone in their neighborhood had acted with such prejudice. Mr. Washington, who had moved to Maple Street just 6 months before David, shared his own story about Linda questioning him when he was checking his mailbox, asking if he really belonged in this neighborhood. I didn't say anything at the time because I didn't want to cause trouble, Mr. Washington explained. But after seeing what happened to David, I realize I should have spoken up. Linda's been making people feel unwelcome for a while now. The Homeowners Association board voted unanimously to add new community guidelines about respectful treatment of all neighbors. They also decided to organize neighborhood get-togethers so people could meet each other properly and build stronger relationships. We want this to be a place where everyone feels welcome and safe, Mr. Chen announced, and we're going to work together to make sure that happens. After the meeting, several neighbors approached David to apologize for not getting to know him sooner and to invite him to various neighborhood activities. The family with teenagers asked if he wanted to join their weekly barbecue rotation. The couple with the beautiful garden offered to help him plan some landscaping for his front yard. David was touched by everyone's kindness, but he also felt overwhelmed. He had moved to this neighborhood because he wanted a quiet place to relax after work, not because he wanted to be the center of attention or become a symbol of anything. 2 days later, David got an unexpected visitor. He looked through his peephole and saw Linda standing on his porch, looking nervous and holding an envelope in her hands. David hesitated for a moment, then decided to open the door. "Hi, David," Linda said quietly. "I know you probably don't want to see me, but I was hoping I could talk to you for just a few minutes." David could see that Linda looked very different from the confident, angry woman who had confronted him 2 weeks earlier. Her face was pale, and she had dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't been sleeping well. "What did you want to talk about?" David asked, staying in his doorway rather than inviting her in. Linda took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize," she said. "Really apologize. Not just because I got in trouble, but because I know what I did was wrong. I've been thinking about it every day since it happened, and I'm ashamed of how I treated you." She held out the envelope. "I wrote you a letter because I wasn't sure I could say everything I wanted to say out loud. But the main thing is that I'm sorry. I made assumptions about you that were completely unfair, and I refused to listen when you tried to explain. That was wrong, and I hurt you, and I'm sorry." David took the envelope but didn't open it right away. "Linda, I appreciate you apologizing, but what you did really affected me. I felt unwelcome in my own home. I felt like I didn't belong in the neighborhood I had worked so hard to move to." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I know," she said, "and I don't have a good excuse for it. I was scared and suspicious of people I didn't know, and I let my fears turn into prejudice. That's not the person I want to be." They talked for about 10 more minutes on David's front porch. Linda explained that she had been struggling with anxiety and depression since her divorce, and that she had been seeing threats and problems where none existed. She had started therapy and was working on understanding her own biases and fears. "I'm moving away next week," Linda said. "Not just because of the legal trouble, but because I need to make some changes in my life. I can't undo what I did to you, but I can try to learn from it and be better." After Linda left, David went inside and read her letter. It was 3 pages long and went into much more detail about her apology and her recognition of how her actions had been rooted in prejudice and fear. She also mentioned that she had donated money to a local organization that worked on community relations and bias education. David felt conflicted about Linda's apology. He appreciated that she seemed to genuinely understand what she had done wrong, but he also knew that the hurt she had caused wouldn't just disappear because she said, "Sorry." The court hearing happened on a Tuesday morning in late September. David had been asked to attend as a witness, even though the whole incident had been recorded on his phone and on the 911 call. Linda pleaded guilty to the charges and was sentenced to pay a $1,500 fine and complete 200 hours of community service with organizations focused on community building and bias education. The judge made it clear that false emergency calls were a serious matter. When you call 911 and make false statements, you're not just affecting the person you're lying about, Judge Harrison explained to Linda. You're taking police officers away from people who might really need help, and you're eroding trust in our emergency response system. After the hearing, David ran into Linda's sister in the courthouse parking lot. She approached him and thanked him for not pushing for harsher penalties. "Linda has a lot of work to do on herself," her sister said. "But I think this experience has been a wake-up call for her. She's getting counseling and really trying to understand how her fears turned into prejudice." Back in the neighborhood, life gradually returned to normal, but with some positive changes. The Homeowners Association followed through on their promise to organize more community events. They started monthly potluck dinners and quarterly neighborhood cleanup days where everyone worked together to plant flowers and pick up litter. David found himself becoming more involved in the community than he had originally planned. He joined the Homeowners Association board and helped organize a neighborhood watch program that focused on actually looking out for each other rather than being suspicious of anyone who looked different. 6 months after the incident, David hosted his first neighborhood barbecue in his backyard. About 20 neighbors came, including families with children, elderly couples, and young professionals. Betty Williams brought her famous potato salad, and Mr. Washington grilled hamburgers and hot dogs for everyone. As David looked around his backyard at all the neighbors laughing and talking together, he felt like he had finally achieved what he had been looking for when he bought his house. Not just a place to live, but a real community where he belonged. The incident with Linda had been painful and stressful, but it had also brought the neighborhood together in unexpected ways. People who had been strangers before were now friends. Neighbors who had lived next to each other for years without really talking were now having regular conversations and looking out for each other. David still thought about that evening sometimes, especially when he was unlocking his front door after work trips. But now, instead of feeling anxious about whether he belonged in his neighborhood, he felt grateful for the community that had supported him and proud of the positive changes that had come from such a difficult experience. The story became a reminder to everyone on Maple Street about the importance of treating neighbors with kindness and respect, and about how much stronger a community becomes when people choose understanding over fear and inclusion over suspicion. As David settled into his Favorite chair that evening after the barbecue, watching the sunset through his living room window. He finally felt completely at home.